Hello, people. Welcome to the Lee Cole 3 podcast with my partner, James Proctor. James, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing really good, Lee. I'm really excited about today's show.
Why don't you? We have a very interesting guest. James, tell us about Gary. Then we'll let Gary jump in and introduce himself and tell us about himself.
Yeah, Gary Jenkins. I've been following Gary, following you since 2015. With the podcast that you done and continue to do, Gangland Wire. You have your YouTube channel too by the same name, and I just really am fascinated by your story of how you've gotten involved with being a investigator with the Kansas City Police Department, worked with the you know taking down and the Kansas City Mafia. A lot of the stuff with like the movie Casino is based on the work that your team did, you and your team did. And so I was just really fascinated and been following you for a long time, a big fan, and just felt we wanted to have you come on, Gary.
Thanks, James. Let me
Okay.
talk about myself a little bit now, Lee.
Yeah, I was waiting. I was waiting for James to do that.
No, okay.
No.
No, I was waiting for James to say, "And Gary, tell us something about yourself."
Yeah,
Okay.
Gary, tell us something about yourself.
We don't want any dead air time here, do we, fellas? Anyhow, so yeah, I came on the police department in 1971. Grew up in a small town. Ran from that small town as fast as I could, and worked in the Ford plant, assembler. I didn't go right to college. I wanted to go right to work and start earning money and raising a family and all that. Worked there for 5 years, and then went on the police department because they had a big push to hire 350 guys, and they did a lot of advertising. I thought, that would be a lot easier than putting these parts on these cars. You have to put something on every 30 seconds or a minute, and then if you want to go to the bathroom, they got to come and relieve you to go to the bathroom. So I applied, and I was accepted, and the rest is history, shall we say. That's been my life ever since in many ways. Kind of work your way up through the ranks. I was a street policeman. I always worked the inner city and where the hot areas because I'm kind of an adrenaline junkie in many ways. But I knew I heard about this thing called the intelligence unit, and I knew they only worked on the big boys. And that's where I wanted to go. I mean, I'd seen enough movies that's where the fun is. That's where the glory is, and you start working on the big boys. Although when you work intelligence on the big boys, on the mob, there is no glory because you can't ever talk about it, and nobody cares anyhow outside of the guys that you work with. So, other policemen would say, you guys don't do anything. You just hang out in bars. We don't ever see you do anything. You do make cases. And so that's okay. I got in the intelligence unit, and now, man, I tell you, I found my niche. That was exactly where I like to go because I always like to take a deep dive look at things, not just roll up on a call, handle it quickly, and say, okay, dust you off or arrest this guy and send him down the paddy wagon and go on, write a report. I didn't like that. Even working as a detective, which I did for a couple of years, it was kind of nice to solve a crime, but God, to solve one it's like, even when you solve it, then it's gone and you go on to something else. And you don't really see what's behind what's really going on, either in the thieves or in the lives of the people who are ripped off. But with intelligence, that's your deal. In intelligence, you find out as much as you can about what people are doing, who they are, who their contacts are, what their life is like, and you have time. They give you time to really build that up and then to actually prosecute people, turn that over to the FBI because state statutes in Kansas City and Missouri we didn't have a witness protection program. We didn't have much money. We just didn't we had guys, we had manpower. So everything we did with the FBI or the ATF or whatever federal agency, because they have the money and the wherewithal and the laws to really go after a criminal organization. So that was, I just love that. And I got lucky. 1976, I went in. 1976, we started a mob war in Kansas City, and things were hot. It was crazy in Kansas City during that time.
And when you And you know, people say, okay, we've seen this movie Casino, and one thing we learned about Casino, and we know it's a movie, so a lot of it's going to be fictional.
Yeah.
But one thing we did learn is that there was a lot of stuff happening between Kansas City, Kansas, in general, and Vegas. And how accurate was that in Casino, the movie, when it came to Kansas? How much power did Kansas have?
Well, we had we were part of a foursome, shall we say, of mob families that had the power. Now, Chicago, just by its size, is always the big duck in the Midwest. Now, Kansas City, if it came to doing business with Chicago, we would ask them. I say we. Nick Savella was our boss at the time. Canny, old time boss. He would not even talk. If an FBI agent would try to talk to him, he wouldn't even talk to him. He would be dismissive and curt and just turn away. Whereas a lot of guys, you know, you just start talking to them, they'll talk to you, but he would not even make small talk. And so it was a really close family that we had here, but Nick had really close relationships with people in Chicago. He had spent time up there as a young man because he got on the outs here in Kansas City and he went to Chicago. And I think Trey knows Gioe, one of the higher up people in the 50s, took Nick in and kind of made it okay. They created some kind of a deal that made it okay for him to come back in, say, 51 or 52. And next thing we know, Nick is driving for the boss, a guy named Tony Gizzo. And next thing we know, that boss dies of natural causes, and Nick is the boss. And he, you know, that was before 1957 because he was at the Appalachian Convention in 1957. They caught him, didn't catch him at the house, caught him about 2 train stops away. He was on his way. And so he had these really good connections, and he owned a guy named Roy Lee Williams, who was kind of the boss of all the Teamsters outside of Chicago and into the Midwest, down into Wichita and Oak City and on down into Dallas. He was the big duck in the Teamsters Union, was close to Hoffa. So Nick owned Roy Lee Williams. Roy Lee Williams was influential when it came to the pension fund. So now I'm getting around to the, you know, how this got started in Kansas City's influence over the events in Casino. Kansas City with Roy Lee Williams and Frank Balistreri, who owned a guy named Frank Renner, who was part of the pension fund, who was one of the actual board members. And Cleveland mob family owned a guy named Jackie Presser, who was, I can't remember his position, but he was like Roy Lee Williams. He's really well-respected, high-ranking Teamster out of Cleveland. And then, of course, Chicago owned the big duck, Alan Dorfman, who was in charge of investing their money and with the pension fund and had been there. You know, he wrote all the insurance that they needed and was basically would have been a member of the outfit had he not already been kind of legitimate somewhere else. So the 4 of them got together and then conspired to loan a man named Alan Glick $62 million, and he bought 4 casinos. And so that's what the Stardust is, the Tangiers, I believe, in the casino. And Chicago owned Lefty Rosenthal. See, in this world, they own you. If you're their guy, they own you. Like Nick Savella owned a guy at the Tropicana named Joe Augusto. Now, we had in Kansas City, I don't want to complicate this too much for you guys out there, but there was 2 separate streams of skim coming out of Las Vegas. Now, the movie Casino did not mention the Tropicana skim at all. But Nick Savella had set up with this Joe Augusto to bring money, about 40 grand a month, to Kansas City. And Nick Savella, just out of the goodness of his heart, sent like 5 figures periodically up to Joey Aiuppa personally, just to keep him happy. He knew how to keep Chicago happy. He didn't have to, but he did. But at the same time, we got the big batches coming out of the Stardust, the Hacienda, the Fremont, and the, all of a sudden I forgot, the Marina. That was over 100 grand a month, probably, going to Chicago, and then part of that would come back down to Kansas City, to Cleveland, to Balistreri up in Milwaukee, and they shared in that for quite a while.
Now,
So
did
it's
Spilotro come out of Kansas City or did he come out of Chicago? I know he was affiliated with Chicago. So did he
yeah,
come
no,
out of?
he had nothing to do with Kansas City. They hardly even knew him. They didn't, it's kind of interesting. They made him into a big deal.
Right.
Spilotro was sent out there to kind of oversee Lefty Rosenthal. Lefty needed, and other things that they were doing in the Southwest. Just like, see, they had Johnny Roselli for years and years before that. Johnny Roselli is now dead. They Chicago's always liked having a man that's their guy out in the West. So they send him out. He gets a gift shop going in the Circus. They boot him out of that after they figure out who he is, and he starts the Gold Rush. It was like a jewelry store right next to the Strip. Tony Spilotro, his only thing was if Lefty needed anything, he could take care of the heavy work. But he had to stay out of the casino. He had to stay away. Once they figured out who he was, he had to stay totally away. We have all these wiretaps, and he's barely mentioned. I do have one where Tuffy's out there and he's talking to him, but it's so coded that you can't understand what they're talking about other than he Tuffy says something about his God, I can't remember what he mentions a Sicilian word for his wife. And Tony goes, huh? What are you talking about? And Tuffy kind of chuckles and says, oh, you don't speak Sicilian, and then told him what he said. So, but Spilotro, he didn't really figure in to the skim into that investigation. He was charged with it in the end. But on those wiretaps, they have such little mention of Spilotro that I was kind of surprised how they were going to rope him into it. It's probably a good thing for the U.S. attorneys that he got killed before they actually tried him for the skim.
So let's turn. Okay, so you said you're in this war started, and it was brothers basically. It was the Savella brothers and the Spero brothers.
Correct.
And how big were their outfits? I mean, did these guys have a big army, or was it brothers with a couple guys with them on each side?
Well, of course, Savella probably had, it's a small family. There's probably, we always figured 10, probably maybe 15 made guys at the most. And each one of them, a lot of them would have their own associates and, professional criminals out there that did stuff and would kick up to them for a little bit of help and protection from other criminals. And they could say I'm with Willie Comisano, I'm with Tiger Cardarella, it gives you a certain amount of protection when you say you're with a made guy, because you're a professional booster or a burglar, and then they fence all your stuff and they get a piece of the action, of course. So the Savellas were they established anybody in the community, in the criminal community, if you were in the know it all, in the professional criminal community, you would know that Nick Savella and the Savella family was the man. They were the big duck. The Spero brothers, they all grew up in Little Italy, what we call Little Italy or Columbus Park, had some cousins out there, their boy cousins that were their age. And of course, they joined in with the Speros, and the Speros are kind of like the poor side of the family.
That's Nick Spero.
That's Nick Spero. They're cockeyed. So Nick Spero, he grows up. He's like a thief. He's a professional thief. He also gets Teamsters job because the mob owns the Teamsters in Kansas City. And there's all the mob guys had Teamsters jobs at one time or another, even if it was a no-show job or they just show up every once in a while. You talk to some of those people who were in management for Yellow Freight or something back then, and they'd say, yeah, they were a pain. They'd show up to work and they wouldn't do anything, and you couldn't do anything about them. So Nick Spero showed up in Teamsters jobs, and he also was, stealing from loads and setting up loads, and he was like had a little crew that would go maybe do a jewelry store burglary somewhere in Wichita or somewhere in the Midwest and bring it back and fence it. And he was kind of but he's a very charismatic guy, but he wouldn't submit to Savellas. He wouldn't do it. As a matter of fact, he made a statement to an FBI agent once. The agent says, well, how come you don't join the boys, and indicating, why don't you go ahead and join the mob, so to speak, because they knew he probably was not a made guy, but he was an important guy because he did a lot of thieving, and he had a lot of influence over rank and file Teamsters. He said, I don't like those guys. He said, they use you like a jockstrap. They stretch you and stretch you and stretch you until you're used up, and then they throw you away. And so he refused to do it, and he wouldn't buckle down. And he also, this is in the 70s, and Nick Savella was very conservative. Now, this seems like a petty thing, but Nick Savella did not allow facial hair or long hair or any kind of flowery clothes. Well, Nick Spero, he's kind of a young guy. He wants to be part of, the new generation. He's got long hair, a Fu Manchu mustache, wearing kind of flowery clothes sometimes. And there's some guys who made comments, I got some FBI reports where they talk about talking to informants and, he looks like an effing hippie, what's wrong with that guy and that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of denigration of Nick Spero. And then all of a sudden he's found dead in the trunk of his car up north of the river. That's like in this city, you get found dead in the trunk of your car up north of the river, and you're any kind of a professional criminal at all, it's a mob hit.
And they wind up losing all three brothers. All those brothers were killed.
Oh, yeah. It got
Savellas and lost.
Yeah.
That's
got crazy. His youngest brother was the next one, who was really a professional criminal and never really even tried to have any kind of a job. He was in the penitentiary on a jewelry store heist that they'd done a few years before when his brother's killed. Yeah. He gets out shortly after, and he immediately starts recruiting people. He is going to form his own crew, and he starts recruiting people, and he's telling people. I talked to an informant myself. He told me, we're going against those Savellas. We're going to move in on their action. You just come with me. And I've got a joint that, we like to go to and be kind of our headquarters. We got a back room we can have meetings at. And the guy kind of like said, well, yeah, that sounds nice. But then he just kind of got away. But he was going out telling people that, well, if I can learn it, then Nick Savella can learn that Carl Spero's out here.
Yeah. Yeah, he ended up getting killed, right? Or he got wounded originally. So was he at the Virginia Tavern on Admiral Boulevard?
So the night of the Virginia Tavern, I tell you what, in Kansas City, I got a call that night, and they said, you'll never believe this. Said somebody just caught all three Spero brothers. There was Carl, who I talked about was the youngest, and Joe and Mike. Joe and Mike were mainly Teamsters. Mike even had a kind of small job in the union, like a business agent or something. And they caught them all three in there, and they'd been tracking them. They'd been casing them. They had been prowling around to see where they were, to see if they could get them set up. And the Bureau knew that. We knew that. But, you can know that, but you can't really do anything about it. Can't be with them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Mm-hmm. So they're all in the Virginia Tavern. That's the joint that was his joint. That was his little clubhouse, right. Frankie Tadero's place. And three men burst in the back door, and two of them spin off. They see Joe and Mike sitting at a table, and Carl's over by the front door on the payphone. And they spin off to the left, two of them, and they just start shooting at Joe and Mike. And the other one with the shotgun chases Carl out the front door across Admiral Boulevard and pops him as he gets across the boulevard, and he goes down. Well, he doesn't die. Mike dies. Joe's wounded in the arm, and Carl goes down. He is made a paraplegic. He can't walk from then on. He's in a wheelchair from then on. But he comes back. He does come back. And now we're getting away from the movie Casino. Just you asked me that question. I didn't quite get to where I wanted to go with that.
Go for it.
That whole scene at the start of that, where they see the microphone up in a vent in a corner store. Well, Nick Pileggi, I'll give him this. He came to Kansas City and spent several days with the lead agent on that case, Bill Owsley. Spent days and days with him and went through files that Bill had absconded with, because Bill has a book about all this too, called Mobsters in Our Midst. And so he knew the story, but when you go to make a movie, they kind of changed it around the way they wanted it. So they had him talking in the store when in fact they were in a little joint called the Villa Capri that had a bug next to the table, and it was Corky Savella. Nick was not there, and Tuffy DeLuna, who was the underboss, and they were talking about that, and what they were talking about, they thought they were going to be talking about plotting murders of the Speros, because that's what we were really focused on at the time. They didn't even know about the scam at the time. They knew it might be happening, but they didn't really have any solid information. They weren't investigating the scam. There's Tuffy. But what they were looking for was talk about murdering the Savellas because they knew, the Speros, because they knew that had informants that had been in there that had discussions about that before. That's part of the probable cause or the PC to get the bug. But they don't hear any talk about murders. They hear talk about $25 million. Are we in on that with them? Jay Brown, you were out there at the Stardust when they cashed that check. Genius and Lefty and a bunch of things like that, that when you put it together and you maybe call out to Las Vegas with somebody that's really intimately familiar with who does what in the casinos, you'll find out Lefty is probably Lefty Rosenthal because he was at the Stardust. Jay Brown was a lawyer who was close to Harry Reid, actually, but also was of counsel or the lawyer for Alan Glick at the Stardust. So they're mentioning these names and these amounts of money in the Teamsters. And it's just like fits, like there's something going on here. The last thing Tuffy said was, I got to find a phone. Well, there was a payphone right there, but he didn't want to use that payphone. So, man, we went on a lockdown on Tuffy DeLuna with an airplane, 2 airplanes, one always standing by for if the one started running low on gas. And I don't know how many cars, 25 cars probably, and elaborate codes, and started following Tuffy DeLuna until we found the payphone. We found the payphone at a hotel. It was a bank of payphones. Found the payphone he's using. Back off, throw a tap on those phones, and then you just got to wait. And whenever you see him going in that hotel, you call down to the office, down at the wire room to say he just walked in. They start listening to all the payphones till they pick up him. And then he and Joe Agosto at the Trop. So it's funny, you see, Joe Agosto was just feeding gossip about Lefty Rosenthal and his problems with the gaming control board and problems at the Stardust and all that stuff. But out of that gossip, then you could pick up as to what's really going on.
And were you surprised? Were they surprised when they heard all this stuff? I mean, it seems like they weren't looking for it, and it just fell in their lap.
Bill would say he was really surprised at that conversation at the Villa Capri. After that, they weren't surprised because they had always suspected. It was kind of well known that they had their hooks in Las Vegas. Everybody in this country knew it. If you paid attention to anything at all, you knew the mob had a lot of influence in Las Vegas casinos. Starting off with Bugsy Siegel, Mayor Lansky. So they always had a lot of interest in it. You just don't know exactly where it is. You got to figure out where it is. And so this gave them a way in to figure out where it was and a way to go. And then you start listening and listening. And,
were they surprised to hear Lefty Rosenthal in there?
No, I don't think so. See, Lefty was well known. Hell, Lefty came out of Chicago, was well known in Chicago. He had gone to Florida. And I think actually I found an FBI report that indicated he probably had done some informing down in Florida because they said something about him going to Las Vegas in a report and said something about activating him again. And I thought, that's interesting. Now, most agents will never, ever admit that he was ever a top echelon informant. My friend will never admit it, even after I told him that there's a newspaper reporter out in Las Vegas that's reporting that Lefty was a top echelon informant and his code name was Achilles. But he will never verify that. Those guys, they hold that thing. That's extremely important to never verify it. Because even though a top echelon informant's dead, he leaves family out there. And so you don't want a guy to say, yeah, okay, so I die, then you're going to tell everybody, and so all my family pays the price. And the family does pay the price.
So you see this Robert De Niro playing Lefty Rosenthal, you would never think, informant, because you don't hear it. And here you are saying there's a good chance this man was an informant. Do you think that while he was out in Vegas, he was doing informing out there?
Oh, sure. No doubt about it. He was doing top echelon kind of stuff, though. If you notice, he's like in the center of all this. This dude is in the center of everything. He runs the Stardust, and they've got all kinds of people saying he's involved with it. Frank Cullotta said he was involved with it, although he didn't know that much about it. I talked to Frank once, and he said, Tony told me not to mess with that. I carry messages to Lefty. If Lefty needs something done, I do it. But that skim stuff, said he told us not to worry about that. But a top echelon informant will just give you this background stuff, make sense of stuff, make sense of what you hear on the wiretaps. And if you think about it, when this case went down and they took down all the bosses in Chicago, Cleveland, Kansas City, and Milwaukee, who didn't go to the grand jury? Who never got an indictment? Who wasn't even known as a witness? Didn't even try to get, bring him in and give him immunity.
Lefty wasn't, right?
He just walked away. He just walked away. They tried to kill him. Somebody tried to kill him, and he just disappeared and walked away. Alan Glick had to come to Kansas City and testify. He pulled a slick one on him. He made out like a bandit, sold the casino and made money, and then came to Kansas City and testified against him. And he buried Nick Savella, that Alan Glick who owned that Argent Corporation, owned those 4 casinos. He buried Nick Savella. I mean, it was bad what he did to Nick. Nick was dead by then, but he buried him.
So when you say that he buried Nick Savella, exactly what did he do to Nick Savella?
He said Lefty, and here's another reason Lefty Rosenthal wasn't even charged or was not brought in as a witness or anything. He said he testified on the stand that one night Lefty came to him and said, there's a man in Kansas City that wants to see you, because Lefty was having problems with Glick. Glick was not wanting to let him have free reign as he wanted. And so Lefty went to Alan and said, come on, they have a plane. The corporation owns a private jet. They fly back to Kansas City and they take him into a hotel room, the Marriott, right out there. He describes the Marriott right out by the hotel, right on the hotel grounds almost. Go into a room, and he said there was a light in there, like what do you call those? Just one light that shines a light down, like it sits
like a spotlight or something.
Yeah, kind of, but it's like a stand-up lamp. So he said there's a stand-up lamp. All the lights are off. There's some men standing in there. They're met by Tuffy DeLuna at the airport. He picks them up, brings them and he names these guys, and he names them. He said that they set him down that chair, and a man who identified himself as Nick Savella stayed behind that light and started talking to him and said, if it was up to me, you wouldn't leave this room alive. Now, I've got this man out there, Lefty Rosenthal. He said, you owe me like, $1 million or $2 or $3 million. I don't remember the amount. And Glick says, well, I told him I can't pay you that money. I don't know. I just got this loan. So what's Nick is intimating that, you owe me a kickback from that loan that I helped you get.
Yeah.
And you're not doing it. You're throwing up roadblocks. He said, you've got a man working out there for you. You know who he is. Of course, Lefty's standing right there. He will take care of it. You just got to let him do what he's got to do. So then he brings up some stuff about Frank Ballesteri, and so he testifies to all this. He testifies Nick Savella made a direct threat on his life. That's what I mean by burying him.
So Glick seems to have he had quite a bit of power, didn't he? I mean,
yeah, they gave him a lot. I mean,
he really don't hear about, but it seems like he wielded a lot of power.
Yeah, he ran those 4 casinos. Now, Lefty Rosenthal would always say that he ran them, and Glick was just a figurehead.
So Rosenthal only had the one casino that he ran?
Well, see, the corporation owned all 4.
Right.
And Stardust was the big duck.
All 4, then.
But he sat in the Stardust. He worked out of the Stardust. But the skim came out of the others. And he had influence over the others too. I don't know how their corporation was divided up as far as management, but somehow he had influence over those other 3 casinos too.
How much of that money do you think they were kicking? What percentage of the Vegas money do you think they were kicking back to Chicago, Kansas City, and those other outfits?
Oh, I wouldn't have any idea. It was a lot of money. It was Angelo Leonardo testified at one time. I think maybe he even testified that they, like 1 month, they even got $100,000. So I don't know. I just know, I know what I know. And that's that out of the Tropicana, which was separate, one casino, Kansas City was getting $40,000 a month because we took off the courier, knew he was bringing in the sandwiches, they called him. He was bringing in the sandwiches for 2 months. So when they took him off at the airport, we served search warrants on everybody's house that night, and they take the whole thing down. He has $80,000 on him. So that would be for 2 months. So we know it's 40 grand a month just out of the trop, which was nothing compared to the Stardust alone. The take was much bigger than that. But
And when they would bring that money back to Kansas City, would they give it directly to Savella?
Well, they would give it to whoever, Tuffy probably.
Okay, and Tuffy would make sure.
Yeah, see, he had a guy named Carl Caruso, called him the Singer on the wiretaps. Everybody had a code name on the wiretaps. They called him the Singer, and he had a regular junket. So he had legitimate travel between Kansas City and Chicago. Everybody, a lot of people I know went on Carl Caruso's junket. And so he would have to go out and come back anyhow. And so he was bringing the money back. And how it got to Nick, I don't know. Carl might have given it to Tuffy or Quirk, his brother, or whatever. I mean, they all knew each other.
And there's one, there's always people in time that aren't really remembered that are involved with these. There was a guy named Leonard Krisego.
Oh, God, yeah.
And he was kind of a psychopath that everybody was afraid of.
Yeah.
Both sides of the family.
Yeah.
And
me too.
And I can't find a picture of him. Describe this guy to us, Leonard Krisego.
I couldn't either.
He was called the Arab, right?
They call him the Arab. I had this informant that told me about him when we were focused in on Carl Spilotro and his little crew and who was part of it. So he tells me about him, and he said, that's the scariest man I ever met. I don't want anything to do with that guy. I got to stay away from him. And what he was finally we figure out who he was. He was a professional criminal. I think he was from Kansas City originally. Spent most of his time in the penitentiary. So what the informant was telling me that Carl Spero and his cousin Scratch Cousy had a meat market business, so they needed to provide him Krisego with a job, and he could get a parole. So they pulled all the strings they could. We didn't really get into how many strings they had to pull, but he did provide him this job because we didn't even know who he was or that he was out until after he was out. He's out. He, whatever this job is, he never has to show up at it. He comes to Kansas City and he's hanging out with Carl Spero. He's partying with Carl Spero. And then shortly after we learn about him, a guy named Al Brandemeyer is a partner with Savella in the gambling business and in a meat locker. He owns a meat locker.
Yeah.
So BNC meets, Brandemeyer and Savella meets. And Brandemeyer is walking out one day, I think maybe at the end of the day or something, and a guy shows up with 2 guns. And 2 guns are important. 2 guns, and robs him of, he claims $10,000 in cash, which would, if you're a bookie, that was likely he could. He probably did it on the payoff day. What's that, Thursday, I think. Puts him in his trunk, and then he just starts shooting into the trunk. It's crazy. I mean, I read the police report, and he starts shooting into the trunk.
He didn't hit him.
He never hits him. Guy got lucky. And he says, you tell Nick Savella the Arabs in town. See, he'd heard all this talk from Carl Spero about, moving in on the Savellas. So then about a month after that, Leonard Krisego gets arrested robbing a drug house from a real well-known drug dealer over here on the east side named Johnny Jewell. He's robbing the drug house, and one of Jewell's kids slips out and calls the police, and they catch him, and he's carrying 2 guns in the robbery. So then I look up, we start figuring out who he is, start researching who he is, and I find an old police report for one of his old robberies that he did, what he's went to the penitentiary for, and he robs a grocery store owner, and he has 2 guns, and he puts a dude in the trunk of his car and then drives him off and leaves him somewhere. He didn't shoot into that trunk. So this guy was consistent with the 2 guns, putting people in the trunk and that kind of thing.
He was consistent with staying in prison too.
I went down and tried to interview him at the Jackson County Jail. He scared the dog shit out of me. I'll tell you what.
It's fun when you hear about characters like that, because that's what he was. He was a character.
And it was just kind of, he had black curly hair. He looked kind of dark. He looked Sicilian, had black curly hair, and he's a big dude, big muscle, those prison built muscles probably, but he was a big dude and he was strong.
The only thing I could find on him was some court records, but I could also find out that when he was in prison, he ran stuff. So it's obvious that he was a bad guy.
Yeah, that's what they said.
And I just wanted to bring him up because it's like there's always guys like him.
There he is.
you know, I was doing the Springfield, talking about the Springfield Mafia, and there was these two brothers, the GS brothers, and one of them is on trial right now for killing Whitey Bulger. But they were very bad guys. I mean, they made one guy look very powerful because they were bad. It's guys like this that people on the street are scared of.
Yeah.
Because he'll do anything.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you probably come across guys like that quite a bit.
Yeah. And this guy, the Sparrows couldn't control him. You know, they got him a weapon out of penitentiary to start making some moves, but they couldn't control him. If they'd controlled him, those GS brothers probably were a little more easy to control by somebody, but they couldn't control Krisego. Krisego was a drug addict, and you know, once he started rolling, why, you know, he just was going to go around and take from everybody.
So, did eventually Nick Savella? What happened to him eventually that brought him down?
Well, cancer, actually. But, you know, it would have been the skimming from Las Vegas. They would have made the case on him. He would have gone to prison for basically the rest of his life, like everybody else did. They were so old by then. I mean, they were. Corky's brother died in prison. Nick died just before the trial started. Tuffy DeLuna was about almost late 80s when he came out. Charlie Mortina was another one of their really in guys back then. He was in his 80s when he came out. And everything had moved on. I mean, the mob had changed during those next years, so they really kind of lost everything. They're still going today, but some of the old guys are still around. I know they meet. There's some young guys doing some stuff, but strip clubs and that kind of thing, I don't know all what they're into. I don't really try to find out too much.
And Nick Savella also, didn't he have some gambling going on down in Daytona Beach?
Oh, I can't remember.
Yeah, I was reading where he had some operations down there. I'm not sure how accurate that was.
They tried to, they had a bunch of our guys went down, and the press showed up. This is back in the 50s, so, and they were going down to play golf, supposedly. No, I don't remember if Nick was with them or not, but there was some connection down there. They had some connection with New Orleans. I think that was in regards to stolen property. They, of course, you know, I don't know. They had about everything they needed to handle in Kansas City. You don't didn't really hear about Nick being like Sam Giancana and having casinos in the Pacific or the Caribbean or in Iran or anything like that.
Now, I'm sure there's some things that James wants to ask you. So, James?
Yeah, just a couple of things with with Nick Savella. So you got him on wiretaps. So there's a lot of wiretaps. And so what did you think of him as you got to listen to him and listen to the conversations? What did you think of Nick Savella? You know, because to me, when I look at him, I see this old time boss that probably had some of the old ways and his honor and a lot of the old school attributes. And so what did you think of Nick as you look back at his life?
You know, and listen to a lot of those wiretaps, which I've listened to a ton of them. There was a set of tapes. There's two sets of them that were bugs. And one of them was in his lawyer's office. They had a lawyer, James Patrick Quinn, who was not like he was a mob lawyer in that he defended mob guys. He was just a good white collar criminal defense lawyer. But if he wasn't in his office, he told the staff it's okay for Nick to come in. And so he and his underboss, I'd say he was kind of an underboss / consigliere, Tuffy DeLuna, would go in there and they would have discussions. Maybe they'd make a phone call or two, or they'd receive a phone call. And it was usually about Las Vegas. So it's really interesting in that as they were having these real thoughtful discussions about what was going on, what Lefty's creating all these problems. What are we going to do about Lefty? Can I reach out and talk to him myself? Tuffy says, well, I think we just settled that at that meeting up north, meeting in Chicago, that you could talk to him directly yourself. And Nick says, well, yeah. I said, I've got an idea. He said, I'm going to reach out to somebody. And then he reached out to Oscar Goodman and was at first was going to ask Oscar Goodman to tell Lefty to call him from a cool phone. But then I could tell in that phone call, he was real cagey, real kind of obtuse in a way. And I don't know if that's the right word, but he indicated that Lefty was out of control and they need to, pull back the reins on this, creating problems with the gaming control board. And in a roundabout way, he was asking Oscar. He said, "I know he's your client, and I can't." And Oscar says, he said, I can't tell him anything. So it's his ego was at play here, and so he was real cagey like that, trying to do things from an obtuse angle, which didn't get him directly involved. Finally, I got the transcript. I don't have the wiretap of him talking to Lefty, and then I got a wiretap of him telling Tuffy about his conversation with Lefty Rosenthal, and he reports it pretty accurately to Tuffy. He said, he said, I didn't go, and Tuffy had already told him, says, don't go too hard on this guy. Don't just jump on him. He said, take it easy on this guy. And so he said, I took it easy on him. And I told him, said, you can cause a lot of trouble for a lot of people. You keep this going. Because one thing he was keeping going was he was operating there as the entertainment director. Well, Joe Augusto, who could never have a casino license, he's operating as the entertainment director to Tropicana. Well, if they crack down on Lefty, then the next one in line is going to be Joe Augusto. And so he's trying to tell him, and finally in the end, he said, I said, just cool it. And I think Tuffy said, well, do you think he will? Dick said, I don't think so. So, it's just kind of interesting. You think of mob bosses, I'm going to go out and order this, and I'm going to have him killed or beat up or anything. He was never like that in these phone calls. He was, except for the Speros. We got the transcript of some where he's talking about getting a 30-06 and shooting him from a distance and how they're going to do it and who could do it and things like that. But on these phone calls about the scam out there, he was always, trying to do things that were really low key and get something done without him getting directly involved.
I just got to put one thing up real quick. Please subscribe. I always forget to say that, Gary.
I do too.
That is a picture of John Gotti III. Today it was made official that he has signed to fight Floyd Mayweather. And in the exhibition bout, it's going to be a very big fight. It's obvious. So John Gotti III will be fighting Floyd Mayweather. And I just wanted to mention that.
Okay. Well, that'll be good for the ticket sales. I'll tell you that right now, because John Gotti,
without a doubt, without a doubt, and that's just one of the fun things that happen here, because we've been hearing rumors of it for like about 6 months, and it's come to fruition. So, okay, so James, pick it up from where you want to.
Yeah. So about just the administration of Kansas City Mafia. We know, the Savellas, he ran that family for 30 years. And then, then he had his relatives that were part of it. So how big was, how many made guys was the Savella crime family? Obviously as a satellite or a faction that Chicago outfit, I guess, supervised to a point, but how big was the Kansas City Mafia through the years, and how many made guys, how many associates? Do you have that type of information?
Oh, they claim there's like 12 made guys, actual made guys. Some of them were older. They made a few during this time. There was 2 that all of a sudden showed up that always rode with either Charlie Martino or Tuffy DeLuna anytime they were out. These 2 guys had been, were younger guys back then, and they all of a sudden showed up, and they were always there with them, and were sure that they had been made. And there's been like 2 or 3 since then, I think. But, as they died off, I would say maybe at their peak in the 60s and 70s, probably 15 guys, including some old guys that didn't really take part of anything, like Joe Flacco and was a couple others, Tanola Coco and one other guy. They were really, senior guys that didn't really do anything anymore.
How important was Carl Savella?
That's a good question. I never could quite. I don't know if anybody's ever figured out his piece in this. He was Nick's brother. He was hot-headed. Called him Cork because he'd pop his cork whenever he got in any confrontations with anybody. He's kind of guy that they were doing a grand jury in a suburban county, Clay County, is part of Kansas City, and they're doing a grand jury up there and calling in some of the mob guys over some gambling operations in Clay County. This is back in the 60s. And there's a bunch of photographers and reporters in the hallway outside the courthouse. And so he pulls his dick out and starts shaking it at them and said, "Hey, record this."
Oh, my God.
That's what kind of guy he was. There's a tape of him out there that some newsman got him to complain about how, they come down there to City Market, they follow me here and they follow me there and they write down my license number and they go here and they go there. So Nick Savella would have never, ever said anything out loud like that, but he was the kind of guy that would say things out loud like that.
So Carl Savella was not boss material.
No, he was not. He was the kind of guy. And Nick told him once, he said, "I'm a little nervous about, we don't want to get any Peckerwoods involved. We only want our made guys involved." Let's talk about killing the sparrows. He said, "We only want made guys involved in this. We don't want any Peckerwoods. Don't go outside." And because Cork was talking about a guy named Gene, who was Gene Shepard, was a professional criminal and kind of his personal associate that he would send out to do different things. He was extorting money from a strip club owner, and the guy wasn't paying him enough, so he paid Gene Shepard and his partner Mike Ruffalo to go put a stick of dynamite under the guy's car, and then he can come back around and say, "I can take care of this problem for you. You just got to pay me a little more money." So he was that kind of guy. He's extortionist and do things directly with street people like that, not Italians or Peckerwoods, as we call them here in Kansas City.
And part of their weapons were explosives, right? They were were blowing people up. I mean, they were doing the Cleveland thing.
No, my God, it was one bomb after another with the Spiro.
New York, they didn't do that.
No.
They outlawed that. And that's why when Frank DeChico got his car blown up and that was why it was outlawed. But it seemed like Cleveland, Kansas City, that was acceptable way
and
to
Chicago,
take
even
out.
Chicago did it too.
Yeah. I think as long as you can get by with no collateral damage, that's a problem with bombs in New York City. It's too much collateral damage.
Yeah, too close. Everything's too close. Yeah.
So we had Carl Spiro was killed with a bomb at the end. He used to joke. I have a gal that used to hang around with him, and she said, "I used to say, if they get me with the bomb, I won't even know it. I'll be dead." So that was his attitude, that Carl Spiro dude.
Well,
but they had tried twice. His nephew came out and saw the bomb underneath his car from his house, and there was like a case of dynamite underneath his car. The guy, I talked to the ATF agent that went out and defused it and took it apart, and he said if that thing had gone up, it'd have blown up half that house besides his car.
And you guys as agents, when you see them bombing people, do you have like a different protocol? It's a little more nervous, scary, because now we're talking where civilians can get injured here.
Well, I don't know. It was always so secret that, when it came up that, I guess I can't really remember even taking that in consideration. I guess I might have, that there might be a bomb here. They might do a bomb. I remember I was watching a place one night after they blew up a building, and all of a sudden I thought, I was at a second floor across the street, and they got some tip that they might come back and do some other business. So they put me in this upstairs, and I'm looking down this building. I thought, if they get in there and I don't see them, they blow that building up. It's going to blow all that glass all over me. I better get away from this window. So yeah, you do take a certain amount of consideration when they're using bombs like that.
And it gives you an idea how much dynamite they were using to have explosive, to take down buildings.
Yeah. Primarily like when the Speros had a bomb and they were trying to blow up Nick or Tuffy de Luna, they had a remote control device so they could see. And I think on that last one that blew up Carl Spero, that we understand there was a car sitting up the street that pulled off right after it went off. And I think they had a remote control. Mainly that the one at Carl Spero's house was out in the country. And it might have got some of his family if they'd have come out and got in the car with him, but it was a mercury switch. So as soon as they jostled that car, it was going.
Yeah.
And were you guys happy? Were you guys happy when they got the Spero brothers out of the way?
No, I don't know.
It's less you had to deal with. It's like,
well, I guess kind of took a lot of the fun out of it, though.
Great answer, James.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't really have any other questions about, your work with the, in the investigative unit and intelligence, and was kind of curious about, you've been doing a podcast for several years, since 2015. And so what are some of your favorite guests that you have? So you do, one of the ones that I just listened to, because we just did a show about Mikey Scars, and you did a 2-part series I found very informative. In fact, it was one of the first, what I would say first interviews that I'd heard from him. And now, of course, he has his own show. But so what were some of your favorite interviews in this mob genre that you've done?
I did like Michael DeLeonardo. I did like him. He was Michael was he was really thoughtful about his life and what he'd done and what it took for him to do that. He described his making ceremony. That's the first guy I had on that described and would agree to describe the making ceremony blow by blow by blow, not just some kind of glossed over about being made, but he described it. He put you right in that room that night with him. So that he was really one of my more favorite. And that was just I don't even know, that was just a fluke. I'd done a show on, it's kind of interesting how I even made a contact with him. I'd done a show on him. Then I talked to another guy who had interviewed him for a blog piece. Couple 3 years before that, even I got hold of that guy, did the blog, and so I just did a phone interview with that guy. God, was his? Was it
Ed Scarpo or
Ed Scarpo? Yeah. What's the name of his blog site? It's a good one.
Yeah, Cosa Nostra News.
Cosa Nostra News, and that's a good one. And Ed Scarpo, he's got contacts you won't believe. Yeah, so anyhow, I interviewed Ed about him, just in general. And somebody made a comment on my, on my website. You can make comments down below.
Yeah.
So somebody made a comment. It was like personal about some piece of furniture or something, like somebody knew him. And I thought, well, this is funny. So I got hold of Ed and I said, here's the deal. Just, you can pass this along to him if you have contact with him. And so he passed it along. Then I got a call from him one day. And so he's like suspicious and he starts asking me about this. I said, no, dude. I said, I just wanted you to know that these people were making this inquiry on here. I don't know anything about anything here. Oh, okay. He said, that's right. You're law enforcement, aren't you? And I said, yeah. So we kind of started talking. So then, and I said, you want to come on my show? And he said, well, sure, I'll do that. And so we set up a time and I interviewed him. And the rest is history. It put me on the map, man, on that YouTube thing. I mean, my audio podcast people are steady eddies. You don't get any big jumps up. On the YouTube, you get somebody that, it just takes off.
You just never know.
And then it goes back down. And then something else, it'll just take off. I had another one, this friend of mine here in Kansas City was in the penitentiary with Lefty Rosario and down at Springfield. And so he came to me, Steve came to me, Steve St. John's his name. actually helped bust him. I was in charge of this. I was a sergeant back in intelligence, in charge of the surveillance team that was following him around while the FBI had an informant into him that was making a drug case on him. But after he got out, we made contact. We've been friends ever since. And so he tells me a story about Lefty Rosario, and he had the idea. He said, I said, I heard Joe Pistone say, well, that Lefty, he's the most one-way guy. He won't do anything for anybody. He always wants more. So, and Joe said, I'd hate to be his cellmate. So Steve says, I was his cellmate. He said, let's do a show on that. So I was able to get hold of Joe Pistone and just get at least a comment or two out of him. He doesn't do a lot of stuff.
No.
But I was able to use a couple of connections and pulled out my law enforcement card. And I got him to say that, I'd hate to be Lefty's cellmate. He was one way. He did this and he did that. So then I played that for Steve, and then Steve started telling some stories about Lefty Rosenthal. That one took off too. That, and I got the FBI agent to give me a little, and he didn't really want to be involved either. He gave me a little bit about how he was one of the agents that told Sonny Black, Napolitano, and Lefty that Joe Pistone was really an agent and not an informant. So that made a great show too. That one took off too, because you never know. It's hard to get those.
Yeah, the thing with Joe Pistone, he's hard to. He has his own stuff going on, so he has speaking fees he gets, and
I know. I knew he was busy.
Yeah, I tried to get him, and I had someone pretty close to him, but did not work.
Like I said, I had somebody who was close to him who then played the police card on him. I worked with the FBI a lot, and so I didn't take up too much of his time, about 5-10 minutes.
So, where you go? You've been on this for you came in with a podcast right about the time that Joe Rogan did, and a lot of guys were early with those podcasts. Did you just sense that podcasts were going to be something that were eventually going to go over pretty well?
Well, I was entertained by him. I didn't know Joe Rogan at the time, but I listened to this one, Serial, and I was like hooked on it. And I thought, well, they're just telling stories. I got a lot of stories. That's all I'm doing is telling stories. I got a lot of stories. I know people that have their own stories. And I looked out and there wasn't any other. There was this one other mafia kind of interest podcast. And I don't think it's still even going now. A guy tried to act like he was a criminal too. And
that's half of
you got a lot of frauds on here.
A lot.
and so I thought, and so I knew this guy that had this little radio show, and I knew how to record stuff. I had microphones and cameras, and I knew how to edit. I knew how to do all this stuff from the documentaries I'd done. By then, I'd done 2 documentaries, or actually, I'd done 4 documentaries by then. So I really knew how to edit. So I just, I talked to him, and he said, "Well, let's try it." So I go over to his little studio, and I just, first 4 or 5, I just tell stories out of like I'm done here on the expanded forum. Then I started getting guests, and I started researching stories on my own and just kind of kept going. It was fun. I'd maybe do 1 or 2 a month there at the start. And since then I've kind of boiled down to at least 1 a week and many times extra each week, plus the 2 channels. It's crazy now. Plus I developed the Kansas City Mob Tour app. So if you want to take a mob tour of Kansas City, go buy my app called Kansas City Mob Tour.
I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'll have James ask you one to finish it off. But I just want your honest opinion as somebody that you were a law officer. What do you think about these guys that have like murder charges and they got out because they became informants? And now they're on here doing shows. And a lot of times they're attacking the very people they put in prison or died in prison. Sammy Gravano attacks John Gotti all the time. John Gotti's been dead for years, and he's still doing it. What is your opinion about when you hear stuff like that?
I guess there's no honor among thieves, huh? But, I mean, I understand what he's trying to do. John Gotti gets hits. John Gotti gets attention. A lot of this crapola, like wars between him and Michael Franchise and everything, what's that all about? That's about getting hits, getting guys talking out here. And, oh, did you see that? They're fighting with each other. That's all about getting attention. They don't care. They're just about making money. I understand that.
And you said
just want to make money.
And you said something.
I get that. I get it. I do a lot of Gotti shows. I get a little sick of Gotti shows because it gets me attention.
And you made a great point there, because without John Gotti in this genre, what do you really have? Because you got Nicky Scars that's stuck to that family. You got Sammy Gavano that's stuck to. You got a lot of people out here. They wouldn't have a story without John Gotti.
Yeah, that's true.
And it gives you an idea. Like people say, "Oh, John Gotti ruined the mob." No matter what you think about John Gotti, the fact of the matter is John Gotti is the mafia genre. That's how I look at it.
He is. And in the entertainment business, he is the mafia. He is, the RICO and the U.S. Attorney's Office. And that's what's cut the mob way back. Those RICO and wiretaps and all that. That's what hurt the mafia and really caused them to go way underground and not be quite. And you took away all their ability to bribe politicians and judges and everything. In Cook County at one time, they just owned that county. In Jackson County, Missouri, up until the 60s and 70s, they owned this county basically. So, that's,
everybody was on the dole, I take it.
Yeah, to a greater or lesser extent.
Okay, James, you want to finish that?
Yeah. Just really, I guess, to kind of bring us around. So, I appreciate everything that, Gary, you coming on. And so we've talked about your past, like you said, you've worked at a Ford plant for 5 years. You was a police officer for 25 years, an attorney for 20 years. You've also been doing podcasts and been a documentary. So what are you looking at now, doing now, and maybe the future? What's your plans moving forward?
Well, I attended the California Superbike Racing School in Las Vegas, and maybe I'll be a motorcycle superbike racer, or I take golf lessons periodically. Who knows? Maybe I'll be a professional golfer. Now, let me tell you something. I got a long ways to go for those that could ever happen.
Yeah.
That's how you
riding motorcycles and playing golf and doing some podcasts. That's where I'm going.
That's how guys like us stay young at heart. You get to a certain age and you think about. I notice when you talk about your future, you talk about your future. You didn't say to me, well, I'm at this age now. I don't know if I could do this. You seem like you just go out and do it.
Yeah, that's been my motto. I just go out and do it.
And I'm the same way, and it's like, it's cool. What keeps me going.
Yeah, me too.
And this whole thing with this, I never thought that my show was going to start taking off. And then I bring in James, and it's doing better than ever. And it's like, you never know what to expect here, because you got these young guys coming in here. They stay for a year. They can't get 1,000 subs and they leave.
Yeah.
People don't realize how difficult this is. You got to really hang in there.
Yeah. And like the tortoise and the hare.
Yeah. And I noticed in your show, you got some very big interviews, and then you have some not so big. So when you don't have the not so bigs, let's say, and you interview somebody and you say to yourself, wow, people are going to like this. Do you get disappointed when not too many people really, because it bothers me. So that's why I was just wondering that answer.
Yeah. I've never been asked that question before. And it does kind of bother me. Something that's really interesting. I had this Canadian guy, I saw a movie about him, top of the line movie. And he was a Canadian guy that the RCMP had gotten a little case on, and they sent him to Thailand. They were trying to make a big case. Well, this guy didn't know beans, but they made him in. I know how people do this. I've seen how DEA and people like this do this shit. They can make you into a dope dealer. They made him into a dope dealer, sent this poor schmuck to Thailand. They all get popped. This kid gets, supposed to get death. He finally gets 100 years or something in a Thai prison. He survives that. He finally, after about 10 years in a Thai prison, he gets a deal where he can come back to Canada. He gets back to Canada. They take a look at that case under Canadian law, and they say, oh, and he's out. And they wrote a book and did a movie. And I just thought it was just fascinating as hell. But, you know, mob fans don't really care about a dude like that that survived all that. But he was a fun interview. I really liked him, too.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's what we do. When we put these up, we don't know what they're going to do. And that's the fun thing. Sometimes I'll put up something, next thing I know, it has 40,000 views. I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah, I know.
I put up a video about John A. like getting beat up in a club.
Yeah.
And it's at 40,000 views. It's like John A. Like, you know, a guy that has made up a lot of his stories is
he's kind of like John Gotti. He gets a lot of attention.
Don't let the Gottis hear that.
I heard that. I heard Victoria Gotti hates him.
They all do. But they have the right. The guy's been another guy attacking people continuously.
Just, making money off his name.
Yeah, making money off his name. Okay. Well, Gary, I'd like to thank you for being here. And
you're welcome, Lee. James, thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
I'm going to put all your information underneath this video before we put it out. And I'll let you know, and I'll share the video with you if you want to share it.
You'll share it on my social media?
Yes, sure. And I'll do the same with your stuff. I'll share it all on my social media.
Okay. All right, Lee. James,
thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much. Great
conversation. I learned a lot.
Good. All right.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
James, that was very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Great guy. He's learned a lot. You don't hear a lot about the Midwest mob, Chicago outfit you hear about, but a lot of that stuff, especially, I've watched Casino, obviously, and trying to understand the true story of that and how Kansas City fell into that is kind of interesting.
And I got to do this one quick time. One more. Okay.
Yeah. Love it.
Because we forget to do this. Somebody was telling me that during these shows I should do it at least 3-4 times, which I'm trying to. In the beginning here, I had a brain fart again. So, well, I appreciate it, my man.
Sure.
Thank you. Please, people, sub underneath here. If you want to donate, there's information about that. Remember, we do these shows and we survive on donations. Yep. And thank you so much. And take care, people.